Historical existence of Jesus. Are there any sources out there aside from Christian sources, the Bible or other Christians? Are there any sources for the historical existence of Jesus outside of Christian sources? That's what we're exploring today. By the way, guys, my name is Daniel Wilson. Welcome to Faith and Fit. I'm a Christian, lived with an atheist for a year, had no idea how to defend my faith, and I don't want you to be one of those Christians. Let's get into it. All right, so reading through evidence that demands a verdict, Sean basically divvies up the historical existence for Jesus outside of Christian circles into three categories. The first category is sources of limited or no value. He mentioned a couple of different ones, but I thought the best one was probably the Quran. Yes, believe it or not, the Quran mentions Jesus, and he actually has a little bit to say about Jesus. Number one, the Quran does present Jesus as a miracle worker. Number two, the Quran speaks of him as an infant to establish himself as a prophet, talks about him allowing him to speak as an infant, working wondrous miracles, wondrous signs, a great prophet. And then number three, it also affirms the virgin birth, right? So those are three things, and I think it may even agree on a couple of different points. But moving on to where it does differ from the Bible, it denies that Jesus was God. If you're a Christian, we believe Jesus is God. We believe he is the way, the truth, and the light. No man cometh to the Father except through me. The Quran also denies the Trinity, right? So, and I have a couple of different verses to back this up. Number one, the denial that Jesus was God, and I'll put it up on the screen. It's Trinity is chapter 4 in the 171th verse. This is where it denies the Trinity. And then in the chapter 4 in the 156th, 157th verse is where it denies the crucifixion. So it denies that Jesus died on the cross. It says something along the lines of, though Allah made it seem as though he did. So it talks about making it appear like he did die on the cross. So for those reasons, Sean puts it into the limited or no value category for the historical existence of Jesus. And the conclusion is, if the accounts of Jesus in the Quran are true, it only further proves the existence of Jesus. If the Quran, the thing about the Quran though, was written much later than the New Testament. The New Testament of Jesus' life, or the accounts of Jesus' life in the New Testament. The Quran, it was compiled in about AD 653, making it pretty late to provide us as an independent source for Jesus. And again, it denies the crucifixion. So most people who don't even believe in, are not Christians, they believe that Jesus did die on the cross. They just doubt the resurrection. Bart Ehrman, he's a famous atheist New Testament scholar. He admits that Jesus died on the cross. He just doubts that he came down from the cross and then eventually was resurrected. So that's the Quran, placing it in the sources of limited or little value. Moving on to sources of some value. So moving on to sources of some value for the historical existence of Jesus outside of Christian sources. Number one, we have a guy named Suetonius. Suetonius was a Roman historian. He was a court official under the Emperor Hadrian. In his Lives of Caesar, which was published around AD 120, he describes events in the lives of the first 12 Roman emperors. Here's what he wrote in the Deify Claudius, chapter 25, verse 4. He wrote, "Since the Jews constantly made disturbances at the instigation of Christos, he expelled them for Rome." Now, Christos is Latin for Christ. And you can actually find this if you go to in Acts. You can verify these writings in Acts 8 in the Bible. In Acts at chapter 18, verse 2, Luke reports the same exact events. I'll put it up on there on the screen for you. So right there, he's not a Christian. He's a Roman historian. and he is confirming the existence of a guy named Christ. He's not saying he was, he died on a cross or he was the Messiah. He's just confirming there was a guy named Christ that was stirring up or making a disturbance. Moving on, we have this guy named Mara bar Serapion. I think that's how you pronounce it. I should have looked it up before. But he was a Syrian. He was a Stoic philosopher. And sometime after AD 70, he wrote a letter to his son from prison, encouraging him to pursue wisdom. And in his letter, he compares Jesus to the philosophers Socrates and Pythagoras and discusses the foolishness of persecuting wise people. So here's what the letter looked like. I'll go ahead and read it for you. What advantage did the Athenians gain from murdering Socrates? Famine and plague came upon them as a punishment for their crime. What advantage did the men of Samos gain from burning Pythagoras? In a moment their land was covered with sand. What advantage did the Jews gain from executing their wise king? It was just after that their kingdom was abolished, God justly avenged these three wise men. The Athenians died of hunger, the Samians were overwhelmed by the sea, and the Jews, desolate and driven from their own kingdom, live in complete dispersion. But Socrates is not dead because of Plato, neither is Pythagoras, and because of the statue of Juno, nor is the wise king because of the new law he laid down. Right? So it's talking about Jews, wise king. There's really no disagreement on him. He's referring to Jesus Christ. And he wasn't a Christian, obviously. I mean, he's comparing Jesus to the likes of Socrates and Pythagoras, and basically just calling him a wise man. And he says he lives on not because he was resurrected from the grave, but because of his teachings. Because of the new law that he laid down. So those are two sources that are of some value. Moving on to sources of great value. So moving on, significant value, we have a guy named Tacitus. So Cornelius Tacitus, he was a Roman historian who lived around AD 56 to 120. His writings date back to the time of Augustus through Nero and is generally considered the greatest Roman historian of that time and probably our best source of information when learning about this time period. And so what happened is during the reign of Nero in AD 64, there was a devastating fire. And a lot of the population, they blamed Nero for this fire. They thought he was responsible. So what Nero did in an effort to redirect the blame was that he started blaming the Christians. And what we have is a writing from where Tacitus is describing basically the events that took place during this time. So here's what Tacitus said from his writings. I'll put it up. But all the human efforts, all the lavish gifts of the emperor, and the propitiations of the gods did not banish the sinister belief that the conflagration was the result of an order. Consequently, to get rid of the report, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations called Christians by the populace. Christos, which is Latin for Christ, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. And a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular. So again, that is a passage from Cornelius Tacitus describing the events that took place where Nero is blaming the Christians for the fire. And, obviously he's confirming the existence of a guy named Christ or Jesus Christ. He's confirming the New Testament accounts that Jesus was crucified. He's also confirming the account that it happened when Tiberius was emperor and also when Pilate was appointed leader in Judea. And he's also confirming the rapid spread of Christianity. He refers to it as a superstition, but we know what he's talking about. Now, some potential objections is that this text could be a forgery, that it was inserted at a later date by Christians. A couple of reasons why this probably isn't the case is that he highly despised Christians, Tacitus, and if it was if this was edited by Christians, they probably would have made the rhetoric a little bit nicer. They probably wouldn't refer to it as superstition. They probably wouldn't refer to it as evil. So they probably would have made the rhetoric a little bit nicer. That seems what would be most logical. Number two, he doesn't specifically mention the resurrection. He does mention a couple of things that surrounding there, but he doesn't specifically mention it. And number three, a lot of theologians have looked at this passage, and stylistically, the conclusion is that it doesn't appear that any other writers edited this text, that it flows seamlessly, and then it's pretty much in line with a lot of Tacitus's other writings. So again, that's a passage from Tacitus, source of significant value coming from non-Christian sources. Moving on, we have a guy named Josephus. Of Jesus excluding Christian sources. So we have Josephus. Now, Josephus was a politician, he was a soldier, he was an historian, and one of the reasons that he is so important in our study is because it's believed that he lived around AD 37 to 100. So that places him right around the time of Jesus' death, but he was also born in Jerusalem. And he was born in Jerusalem shortly after Jesus' death, which places him in Jerusalem right around the time that the book of Acts said the Christian church was starting to flourish. So he's an author as well, so we can look to a couple of different passages. And again, this is excluding the Bible, so he's not a Christian, he's a Jew. But we look at Antiquities 20.200. Here's the passage that we're referring to. So I'll put it up on the screen for you. When therefore Ananias was of this disposition, he thought he had now had a proper opportunity to exercise his authority. Festus was now dead, and Albinus was but upon the road. So he assembled the Sanhedrin of judges and brought before them the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, whose name was James, talking about the brother of Jesus, and some others, or some of his companions. And when he had formed an accusation against them as breakers of the law, he delivered them to be stoned. So not only is he confirming the death of James when he was stoned, but he's referring to not only Jesus, but he's referring to Jesus as the Christ. So that's huge. So not only is he referring to Jesus, but he identifies him as the brother of James and also as the Christ. Some scholars doubt the validity of this passage, but most people hold the view that this is authentic for a couple of different reasons. It appears in all of the Greek manuscripts, and number two, Josephus is referring to James, the brother of Jesus, in sort of a matter-of-fact, laissez-blase way. If it is believed that if Christians came in at a later date and inserted this passage, that they would have had a lot more reverence for Jesus and Jesus Christ. Josephus is really referring to Jesus and James in a matter-of-fact way. There's no reverence. As a matter of fact, he only really mentions Jesus to identify James. So most scholars hold the view that this is an authentic passage by Josephus, which is huge. I mean, he's not a Christian. This isn't coming from the Bible, and he clearly identifies Jesus as who they call the Christ. Moving on, so that was Antiquities 20.200. Moving on, we have the second passage, which is Antiquities 18.63. Here's the passage. Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as to receive the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. He was the Christ. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men amongst us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at the first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them alive again the third day. As the divine prophets had foretold, these and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him,
and the tribe of Christians so named from him are not extinct at this day. Okay, so that's pretty huge. There's three general views that scholars usually hold when it comes to this passage. One, it's completely authentic. Josephus said every word of this. Number two, it's completely fake. It is Christians came in at a later date and just completely inserted every word that you just heard. And number three, which Sean says most scholars generally hold this view, is that Josephus did say this. He does mention Jesus, but he doesn't necessarily say everything that we just read. That he did say this. He does mention Jesus, and then Christians came in at a later date and sort of doctored it up, right? So here is a passage that a scholar wrote that said what he thinks it may have looked like. So again, this is just basically an opinion, but this is an opinion of what the authentic version may have looked like. At this time, there appeared Jesus, a wise man, for he was a doer of startling deeds, a teacher of people who received the truth with pleasure, and he gained a following both among many Jews and among many of Greek origin. And when Pilate, because of an accusation made by the leading men among us, condemned him to the cross, those who had loved him previously did not cease to do so, and up until this very day, the tribe of Christians named after him has not died out. So, I'll be honest, seems like the third view is probably what's the most logical. I mean, for him to say everything that he just said, you would think that he's a Christian. But then you have this guy named Origen, who was an early church father, writing at a later date that Josephus was not a Christian, that he did not convert to Christianity. But he's clearly talking about Jesus dying on the cross, being resurrected on the third day, referring to him as the Messiah. I mean, those are all the core tenets of Christianity. So I don't know how you can get any more Christian than that. So probably is the latter of the three. He does mention Jesus. He maybe talks about a couple of these different things, but Christians may have come in and doctored it up a little bit. But that's Josephus. Hope you comment.
Conclusion of all the evidence that we've gathered for the historicity of Jesus from non-Christian sources, we can at the very least derive that Jesus was a real person that walked this earth, Jesus Christ. While the writers don't necessarily confirm the deity of Jesus, or that he was a God, that the resurrection, and some writers are hostile to Christianity. None of them really deny the existence of Jesus. So at the very least, we can make an inference to the best explanation that there was a guy named Jesus Christ that walked this earth, that probably performed miracles. However you perceive that. For me, I'm a Christian. I believe Jesus Christ was born of a virgin, died on the cross as an atonement for our sin, that he shed his blood on Calvary, and was resurrected on the third day. Those are my beliefs, and hopefully you got some value out of this, and I'll see you on the next video.